Welcome back everyone to the Made by Hand Shop. I'm Bobby Sharp. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day and stopping by to watch this episode. If you would, while you are here, hit that subscribe button. In this episode, I'm going to take a set of drawings for a project that I'm working on and lay that out on a piece of plywood and cut all the pieces out. We will assemble these later in another episode. Give me a minute to move the camera and we will start today's episode. Alright, so this is a piece of closed cell insulation. Then we'll lay our piece of plywood on top of this. So what you are looking at is a drawing of the pieces that make up the table saw stand. When I designed the table saw stand, I color coded all of the pieces. By copying the parts and laying them out in the same plane, just as if they were on this piece of plywood, SketchUp gives you the ability to move the pieces around so that you can optimize your material. In this situation, what we're going to do, since we have some overlapping parts up here on the top, we're actually going to cut this piece of plywood long ways at 15 5/8. So that will be our first cut. Then we will come back and measure out 42 inches and make a cut here. And then we'll go another 36 inches and we will make a cut there. I'm not sure if this is being picked up on the camera, but the edge of this plywood is pretty banged up. They only had about 10 sheets at the big box store, and I got a discount because of the damage. One of the corners is also damaged, so we're going to try and work around that. It's always good to make sure you inspect your material and figure out how you're going to lay pieces out like this, and work around any kind of flaws that the material may have in it. In this case, this edge is pretty damaged. Alright, so we determined that we need to make a cut at 18 5/8. So hopefully we have an opportunity to have some scrap here on the end. So we're going to lay this out basically in this orientation. So this needs to be 18 5/8. So we'll mark that. And one other thing I failed to mention, when I drew this, I've actually allowed an 8th inch gap between all of these pieces, and that represents the saw curve. So by doing that, because I mean an 1/8 of an inch over a 48 inch piece of plywood is going to add up. So that's why this is 18 5/8, is so that when we cut it on the table saw, we're allowing for that 1/8 inch curve that the blade is going to make. This corner has a little bit of damage on it, so we'll have to think about what we're going to do with that. Now, I don't have a track saw, but this is the next best thing to one. And you can make one of these. It's simply just a thin piece of, I believe this is just underlayment, just a 1/4 inch piece of plywood of some sort, and the straightest boards you can find, and make these together, glue them together, nail them together. And you don't worry about, when you make this board, make this measurement here a little larger than the footprint of your saw. In other words, from the edge of the guide to the blade, if that's 5 inches, let's say, make this board about 5.5 inches. And then what you can do is, once you get everything together and it's glued together, set your saw, set it on here and run it through and make a cut. So this measurement from here to here, I don't even have to worry about. All I have to do, just like a track saw, is lay it right on my mark keeping in mind which side of the blade that I'm on. So in this case, I want to be on, want the blade on the other side of the mark, so I have to allow for that. And then we just clamp it down to the piece. And this will give us enough distance on the back side here. Hopefully you can see that. And by allowing some overhang on the 1/4 inch plywood, it gives you a place to clamp back here on the back side, and it's out of the way of the motor on the circular saw. So just clamp the other end. Now you may be wondering why I use the closed cell insulation underneath the plywood, and that's because that totally supports the piece of plywood that we're cutting. And when we set the saw up, we're just going to barely go through the plywood itself. This is 18 millimeter thick plywood. It's supposed to be 3/4, but it actually measures 18 millimeter. And the best thing about the foam is it helps support the fibers once you cut through the plywood, and you have less blowout on the bottom side of the plywood. All right, so we're ready now to make our first cut. This is just a regular DeWalt circular saw. It has a 40 tooth blade as you can see, and I'll double check my measurement real quick, and we'll make our first cut. All right, so we've made our long cut, ripping the plywood lengthwise at 18 5/8. So now let's turn our attention to the piece that was left, the larger piece of the plywood, and then we'll go back and make this 42 inch cut and the 36 inch cut. And one thing I failed to mention is you want to make sure that the plywood is square. Generally it is square, at least squarer than you think it is. So that looks really good. So looking at our drawings, we're going to come off of this edge 42 inches. Just measure that at the bottom and at the top. Now I can cut this a different way. Like I said, you don't need a track saw, an expensive track saw. You can make one of these. You can use just a straight edge. Matter of fact, you can take, if you have a level, you have to do some measuring here and measure from the foot, the edge of your foot to the blade. This is plugged in, so be careful here. But from the edge of the foot to the blade, you'd have to figure out what that measurement is. This is where the kerf would be, or the saw blade will be. So we would lay actually we do this the other way around, excuse me. We would move the straight edge over so that the blade lands directly on your line. If you don't have that, you could use If you don't have a straight edge that's nice and straight, then you could find a piece of board or something to do the same thing. But in our case, I have the door board. Some people call it a door board or whatnot. So we're going to do this a little bit differently than we did the other one. I'm actually going to have the blade, the waist, this will be the waist side, so we want 42 inches from our mark back that way. So I'm actually going to put this edge on the 42 inch mark. That way the left edge of the blade will cut exactly on the line and make it 42 inches. I'm going to slide this over to give us some more room here on this end of this side of the table. So what I do is, when I put the clamp on, I'm actually, in this case, my little table is underneath here, so I'm actually clamping the entire piece down to the table. But for the most part, you really just need to clamp your door board to the plywood. Well, in this case, I don't want to lift this up here. So what I'm going to do is actually put a spacer on the other side of the door board and clamp the insulation and the door board, clamp it all together. So I've just got a piece of scrap that's 18 millimeter thick. Grab that clamp there. All right, and this piece is heavy enough that it shouldn't move while we are cutting this. If you wanted to, you could lift this up and clamp it here, but unfortunately the clamp's going to be upside down with the longer part of the clamp sticking up, and that's probably going to interfere with the motor when it comes across. You see, in this case it may clear it, so we might be all right in that regard if we had to do it that way. But we're clamped on both sides. This piece is pretty secure on the closed cell foam that's underneath there, and so we'll just cut that. See what this looks like. Let's check our cut, see how accurate we were. We are dead on 42 inches. That's exactly what we're looking for. All right. This stuff is not light, y'all. This 18 millimeter plywood is a full sheet is pretty heavy. It's probably around 70 pounds or so. All right, so our next cut is going to be 36 inches off of this cut, and I'm going to check square again on this just to make sure. That looks really good. right, let's check that. 36 inches. Exactly where we need to be. Let's check it on this side. And we're still square. Let's see. That cut is really nice. There's actually a little more tear out on the top than there is the bottom. But these are going to be structural pieces. This table saw stand and outfeed table would be laminated, 3 layers of this together, and I'll show you how all that goes together in another episode. But so now we've got 4 panels cut out: the long piece that we cut first, the 42-inch piece, the 36-inch piece, and this piece here should be, this last piece, this better be a little over 15 inches, and it is. Actually 17 1/4 will wind up being the longest piece. So we're at 17 3/4, so this really nasty edge right here, that'll all be waste. So that was really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this, saying that this is 17 3/4 inch. You can see this in the background. This is actually the 42-inch piece, and this is the 36-inch piece. That'll kind of keep things straight for us. Now I'll put that long piece back on the table. Alright, so I have got our first piece back on the table here. And according to our drawing, we can actually leave these together. So that's going to be one side is 22 33/64, and the other side is 22 33/64 as well. But actually, looking at this, I think we might need to flip this around and actually do 17-inch here, because we can cut that all the way across. That'll make this piece smaller, and then we can rip some of these other pieces. We'll get to that when we get these bigger pieces, get this broke down a little bit further, and then we'll have smaller pieces that we can deal with on the table saw. So I think I'll cut this 17-inch on this end, because the damage end is on that end. So that looks like a good plan. So this is supposed to be 17 inches. And again, we want to cut directly on the line. Slide this down a little bit. All right, that'll be out of the way of the camera. So we want this edge to be on top of the line, because the edge of the blade will run right against it, so we want it right there. Now this is small enough that I'm actually going, or short enough that I'm actually going to pick this up and clamp it right here. Where's my other clamp? Small adjustment to this. Alright, we're set up with a little bit different angle. And I did make a mistake on that last 17-inch cut. I should not have done that. There was a longer board that was longer than 17 inches, so I think there's enough on another piece of plywood that will make up that mistake there. So, my board here, and we will. All right, so the next cut we're going to make is 22 and 33/64, which is a 32nd past half an inch. So 22 and 33/64. All right, so I'll just do a 9/16. That'll give us a little bit of leeway. 2, 4, 6, 9. Alright, we'll measure this one. Or, I say measure, I meant mark. We'll mark this one 22 and 33/64. Alright, so this other piece now is probably small enough. We're back in. Okay, this last piece here is probably small enough that we can handle that on the table saw. So I'll clean things up, vacuum some of the sawdust up, put up the door board and the piece of foam, and we'll turn our attention to the table saw. All right, we're taking a look at our drawing again, and if you'll notice here, all of these pieces on this sheet are 3 inches wide. So we'll set up the table saw to rip all these pieces at 3 inches, and we'll just cut them all out. All right, so let's set our fence to cut a 3-inch wide strip here. Alright. Should be dead on 3 inches. Well, as you saw in that last one, we are a little bit thinner This was the 17 5/8 inch piece. So we're a little bit off, but that's nothing to worry about. A quick check. Let's cut that 3 inches, and we're dead on it. So, all right. So these are the 17-inch pieces. So these are all of our pieces cut to length and width. It certainly doesn't look like a sheet of plywood now. And it doesn't even look like this would make up a sheet of plywood. But these are all the pieces that came from that sheet of plywood that you saw at the beginning of this episode. After breaking down this piece of plywood, this is the waste that is left over. And this piece could be used later as well. So it's really not waste. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. These pieces that I cut out today will be part of an upcoming project which involves building a table saw stand. This table saw stand is just a small part of an assembly table that will be another episode as well. If there's something that I didn't cover today that you would be interested in talking about, comment below. Also, if there's anything you saw in my shop and have questions about that, leave us a comment about that as well. Again, while you're here, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. Give us a thumbs up, and as always, be all you can be, but best of all, be sharp. Stay safe, everyone.